Guild Wars 2, what people call one of the most friendly MMOs because the game allows you to play how you want, but there's still always going to be those few bad apples who ruin it for the rest. While I'll be going over an issue that is massively overrepresented in the community, understand that this is perpetuated by a small minority of players, but the reason it's an issue is because the more misinformation gets spread, the more people actually start to believe them because they don't know any better. The issue I'm talking about is celestial stats. They essentially give every stat, but not enough to make the build fill a specific role, and just enough of it that compared to a 3 or 4 stat equipment, it's like a 3-to-2 ratio in total stats, allowing them to play many roles. There are many who think they're overpowered, and many who think they're fun and balanced. And that's fine, but when people start harassing others for playing builds they don't like, it's a bit cringe. And it's even gotten to the point where people will accuse you of playing celestial builds even when you aren't. Like for example, when I was working on my Dragon Burst Virtuoso build, I got people complaining that I was celestial, or on my Tool Scrapper, you cele bro? There's also people who take it personal and say that I can only win with my celestial builds, or that I only make videos on them. Seems like they get to choose what their reality is. And while I do believe that celestial stats are a bit bloated and create builds that can be way too tanky, there's the reality that there are way more unbalanced things out there, like permanent stealth deadeyes, permanent protection soul beasts, fresh air catalysts, willbenders that can one-shot you while having insane mobility, vindicators or really any revenant with salvation that are just as tanky as celestial builds. Also, celestial builds don't scale up very well in large fights where the pure minstrels supports and berserker DPS roles are much more powerful. World vs. World is not about 1v1s or even fair fights. It's about managing resources and choosing battles to invest in, and which you need to suffer and hold out in to be able to win more overall objectives. This has always been what makes Guild Wars 2 PvP game modes fun and interactive, despite an enormous task of balancing classes that have their own unique mechanics. If you go into PvP and you're playing a roamer build, and you start 1v1ing a duelist build, and you lose, do you complain that they're playing a duelist? No, because you rotated poorly and took a 1v1 in a bad matchup when you have advantages elsewhere. When you're forced to 1v1 to win because you're playing for the objective, then overpowered builds are more of a problem. But in World vs. World, where you're constantly being assaulted by greater numbers or ganking people who are isolated, this isn't really the case. Really, the issue is that these players have an unchecked ego. They see these outnumbered roaming montages where they're playing one-shot builds against extremely new players and cutting out all the times they died against better players or couldn't get the kill because it took too long. Then they get hyped and assume that they can do the same thing. They go out into World vs. World on their favorite build and get demolished by a Zerg running them over or some thirsty Harbinger with more toughness than a tank. You aren't going to beat these situations by ramming your head into them. You need to play opportunistically if you're a squishy burst class, or you need to actually get good at the game, or you need to get on a better build for solo roaming. Many people say that solo roaming is dead because celestial builds aren't fun to play against, but the reality is that solo roaming is only viable because of celestial builds. Imagine being a new player, just trying to get your dailies done, and you get ganked by some thirsty quote-unquote roaming guild. It's not a good time. The only thing that gives them a chance is to run bruiser builds, like the Celestial Harbinger, like the Salvation Vindicator, like the Permanent Protection Soul Beast. You need these builds to even survive against coordinated groups or extremely veteran players. Is that a problem that there are some easier options? No, not really. That's what's keeping players in the game. If you want to engage in fast-paced 1v1s with animation cancels and burst combos, then go play a fighting game, or go to the dueling area, or go to PvP. The real issue is there's no extrinsic reason to be a solo roamer because you get more rewards and win more fights when you group up, and splitting up doesn't give your team any real advantage. And when players group up and want to win, you realize that adding minstrel supports are the best way to win. And when you want to fight against minstrel supports, you need a lot of damage and boon rips. And when you have extremely heavy damage builds, you need minstrel's supports to keep them alive. Before long, you're in a Zerg comp. And that can be fun for some people, but the only reason to split up is intrinsic, so until there's a reason to split up, solo players are always going to be at a disadvantage, and celestial gear really helps them to survive and learn the game mode before they meet other players, get in guilds, and learn how to play to the situation. If you're not able to beat celestial builds 1v1, then adapt, play a better build, disengage, create larger fights. And if you don't want to do that, then at least stop complaining and insulting people who are just playing the game for fun, because ArenaNet does not make the game for elitists who want everyone to play the way they want. They make the game for everyone. But that's just my opinion, and I'm sure you all have your own opinions. So please, leave your copium in the comments, and I'll see you all next time.